Why did she freeze the moment my wife showed her ID? The look on Dolores's face, that flush of power draining into pale, stunned silence, wasn't just disbelief, it was fear. The kind that curls deep in your gut when you realize you picked a fight with the wrong person. But this story didn't start at our doorstep with cops and credentials. It started weeks earlier with a letter, just a plain sheet of paper, tucked beneath our front door like a snake sliding through a crack. Your lawn is in violation. That was all it said at the top, cold, condemning, official. And it was signed, of course, by Dolores, our self-appointed queen of the HOA. 15 years in power, and not because the community loved her, she stayed on top through manipulation, backroom promises, and fear. The bylaws were her sword, paperwork her shield. She didn't just enforce the rules, she bent them into weapons, and this time, that weapon was aimed at us. Me and Evelyn. To be fair, our lawn wasn't perfect, a little wild at the edges, maybe. A patch of tall grass swaying too freely for Dolores's taste. But it wasn't about the grass. Not really, it never was. Dolores wanted something, we just didn't know what yet. I was ready to mow the lawn and be done with it. Evelyn wasn't. She read the letter slowly, not irritated, not afraid, just focused. I could tell something in the wording caught her attention, too formal, too specific. She held the paper up to the kitchen light like it might reveal a hidden code. She's up to something, Evelyn murmured. I laughed, trying to wave it off. It's just grass, hun. But she didn't laugh back. That's the thing about Evelyn, she doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't storm around or start fights. She watches, thinks, moves when she's ready. And beneath that calm exterior, a mind built to dismantle systems. Homeland Security trained her for that, not the badge and gun stuff, but something harder: urban planning, environmental compliance, federal land use. Dolores had no idea what she was stepping into. It started small. Dolores began walking past our house twice a day, not strolling, inspecting. Her gaze lingered not just on the grass, but on the wooded land just beyond our fence. That patch of trees that buffered our lot from the strip mall across the road. One day, Evelyn spotted her holding what looked like a zoning map. The second Dolores saw her watching, she tucked it away. She's not after our lawn, Evelyn said flatly. She's after the land behind it. I didn't want to believe it, but the letters kept coming. One after another, each more aggressive, each fine higher than the last. Dolores accused us of everything from grass blade height violations to community aesthetic obstruction. I didn't even know what that meant. She's creating a paper trail, Evelyn muttered, flipping through the fines. If she can frame us as a problem property, she can push for rezoning without resistance. I stared at her. You think she's trying to what, build something? Evelyn nodded. She's testing the neighborhood's tolerance, starting with us. The thing is, Evelyn didn't just guess, she started digging. Late nights spent combing through county zoning maps, buried HOA amendments, archived meeting minutes. She wasn't just defending our lawn, she was investigating a hidden agenda, and as she uncovered pieces of it, something in her shifted. This wasn't a nuisance anymore, it was a mission. Meanwhile, Dolores escalated. She photographed our mailbox, filed a complaint about potential vermin habitat in our backyard, left sticky notes on our trash bin. I wanted to scream. Evelyn didn't. She took notes. Then something strange happened. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind elderly woman who had just moved in, stopped Evelyn on her walk. You know, she said gently, Dolores did the same thing back in my old neighborhood, tried to rezone a greenbelt by bullying the homes next to it. Said it was for beautification, but she had a developer friend waiting in the wings. Evelyn's eyes lit up. That was the connection. Dolores had done this before, and she was trying it again here. The undeveloped land behind our home was part of a legally protected ecological buffer zone. Common property, it couldn't be developed. Not without extensive environmental permits and community consent, which Dolores didn't have, but she was hoping no one would notice. Our slightly wild lawn was just her excuse, a distraction. Evelyn smiled for the first time in weeks. She's sloppy, she said, and she's predictable. What Dolores didn't know and couldn't possibly imagine was that Evelyn had access. Through her federal job, she could confirm environmental protections, cross-reference zoning histories, and track permit requests, and what she found made her blood run cold. Dolores had already drawn up a full proposal under the guise of community landscape optimization. She included architectural mock-ups, inflated property value projections, and claims that our lawn was hindering progress. The audacity. She submitted it all as part of a special HOA hearing scheduled for next month. The centerpiece, a formal review of our violations. Evelyn was the star defendant in Dolores's twisted little show trial. I watched my wife stand there, her hands tracing the lines of a zoning map spread across our kitchen table, her eyes sharp and unblinking. She didn't say much, but I could feel it. She wasn't preparing for a meeting. She was preparing for war, and Dolores, she had no clue. She thought she was dragging us into her domain, where she controlled the rules, the votes, the fines, but she didn't realize she'd invited a Homeland Security compliance specialist into her paper kingdom. The cracks in Dolores's plan were spreading. She just didn't see them yet, but she would. What kind of person calls a federal hearing over a lawn? That was the question echoing through my mind as Evelyn handed me a thick stack of papers. One rainy Thursday morning, pages of architectural proposals, bylaws, color-coded zoning overlays, and a formal hearing notice from the HOA signed and sealed by Dolores herself. It wasn't just a neighborhood complaint anymore. It was a trial, and we were on the docket. Dolores had called a special session of the HOA board, mandatory attendance, officially to review persistent landscaping violations, but buried in the language was the real reason: approval of her green space optimization proposal. She was using us as the emotional centerpiece, the scapegoat, the proof that she needed to clean up the community to move forward with her plan. She's trying to break us in front of the entire neighborhood, Evelyn said quietly. I could see it now. Dolores at the front of the community center, draped in self-righteousness, arms flung dramatically as she pointed to slides of problem lawns and underutilized land. She would speak in careful, measured tones, quoting bylaws and feigning concern, while behind her lay blueprints, concrete pours, and money trails leading right to her own pockets. But what Dolores hadn't planned for was the silence. Evelyn didn't respond to any of the letters, didn't push back, didn't give her anything to fight against, because she was waiting for this moment. We arrived early to the hearing. The community clubhouse had never felt so tense. Rows of metal folding chairs, a projector screen flickering with charts. Dolores stood near the front, rehearsing her lines with the smarmy landscape architect she'd hired. You could smell the power on her, that smug confidence, that arrogant gleam. But she didn't look at Evelyn, not once. Maybe she thought ignoring us would rattle her. Maybe she believed Evelyn had already lost. She had no idea what was coming. Neighbors trickled in. Some out of curiosity, some out of fear, some like Mrs. Gable out of quiet support. I saw Mr. Henderson too, the newest board member, young, soft-spoken. Clearly uncomfortable, he offered us a tight-lipped nod. But his eyes kept darting toward Dolores like he was watching a lion pace in a cage. Then the meeting began. Dolores took the floor. And for the next 40 minutes, she delivered the performance of a lifetime. She didn't open with the complaint about our lawn. No, she opened with a vision. We stand, she declared, at a pivotal moment in our neighborhood's history. A moment to beautify, to elevate, to protect our property values. She used words like revitalization, aesthetic alignment, strategic green enhancement. Then, slowly, methodically, she introduced her proposal slide after slide. Trees replaced with walking paths, native brush flattened into community gardens. The undeveloped buffer zone behind our house? It was rendered in crisp digital detail as a community commons, complete with benches and a new parking area. She even pulled out photos of our lawn snapped without consent, describing it as a visual disruptor that demonstrated non-compliance with the collective vision. I clenched my fists, but Evelyn? She just watched. Not with shock, not with outrage. With precision. She wasn't there to argue, she was there to document. Dolores brought up the architect slick, smiling, talking about increased property values and neighborhood cohesion. He tossed around numbers, market projections. His tone was polished. But Evelyn was already shaking her head, completely fabricated. She whispered. Then Dolores returned to the front, her final slide, a motion to vote. We cannot let a few individual properties, she said, eyes sweeping the crowd, hold us back from our full potential. I urge the board to approve the proposal in principle, so that we may begin filing the necessary permits. The room buzzed. People were nodding, murmuring, hooked on the idea of increased home values. Caught in her spell, Dolores smiled. She thought it was over. Then Evelyn stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't announce herself. She simply walked to the back table where HOA documents were stacked for review, and set down her own folder inside it. Proof that the undeveloped land Dolores wanted to optimize wasn't just part of the HOA common area. It was a protected ecological buffer zone, designated by the city, registered with the county, backed by state and federal environmental law. She said nothing, just laid it all out, line by line, and left it there. The meeting ended like a deflated balloon. No vote, no approval, just confusion. And Dolores, she barely moved. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they were white. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her eyes darted from Evelyn to the folder and back again. It was the first time I saw fear creep in. That night, Evelyn worked late. She didn't say much, just made tea, spread out zoning documents, and started logging timestamps, recording every statement Dolores had made. That contradicted public record. This, she murmured. Tapping one phrase was a direct violation of community charter. And this time, I didn't try to distract her because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Evelyn wasn't just fighting for us. She was fighting for the entire community, for every neighbor who'd been bullied, every resident who'd paid a fine out of fear, every whisper that never made it to the meeting floor. She was taking the kingdom back. Dolores, of course, panicked. The next morning, we woke up to a new notice. Dolores had filed an emergency complaint. She claimed Evelyn's continued non-compliance was now a threat to public harmony. She accused us of willful obstruction. She even filed a report, yes, a formal report with the local police department, citing hostile behavior and repeated defiance of HOA rulings. Evelyn just smiled. She's baiting me. Are you going to take it? I'm going to bury it. And that's when the sirens came. Two patrol cars, lights flashing, parked right in front of our home just before 8 a.m. The neighborhood watched from behind blinds and hedges, whispering into phones. Dolores was already standing outside, dressed like she was attending a press conference, arms folded, chin high, barking details at the officers. This is a matter of neighborhood order, she insisted. I'm the HOA president. I represent the will of the board. The officers listened with carefully neutral expressions. Then one turned to Evelyn. Mom, can we verify your ID? Evelyn nodded, no hesitation, no defensiveness, just calm, deliberate motion as she reached for her wallet and pulled out a dark blue card. The seal of the Department of Homeland Security. Special Agent, Urban Environmental Compliance Division. The effect was instantaneous. Dolores froze mid-sentence, her breath caught. The blood drained from her face like water from a sinking ship. Her eyes locked on that card as if it were a live grenade. The silence that followed, you could hear the leaves rustling down the block. One of the officers, older, grizzled, maybe a veteran, saluted, not formally, but enough. A gesture of recognition and deep respect. Evelyn didn't puff her chest or flash her badge. She simply said, "Officers, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm currently conducting a review of potential zoning violations within this community. Ms. Dolores may be attempting to leverage her HOA position for personal development gain using harassment tactics to coerce approval. No threats, no accusations, just facts." And that's when the shift happened. The officers turned to Dolores. Their tone changed, no longer deferential, now precise, cold. Measured. "Ma'am, we'll need a full statement and documentation." Dolores stumbled, literally stumbled backward. Her words tumbled out in jagged pieces. "I didn't know. I thought she was just, this is harassment." She never said, "I didn't know who she was." But no one was listening. The officers were already taking notes, asking questions, photographing the stack of HOA letters we'd left on the porch table. Dolores stood there, a woman unraveling, the thread of her authority pulled loose, stitch by stitch. That evening, Evelyn filed her report, not with the HOA, not with the police, with the Department of Environmental Protection, the city's Urban Planning Committee, and 3 regional conservation agencies. Attached was the full audio transcript of Dolores's proposal, the zoning maps, and the police incident log. No accusations, just evidence. 3 days later, the first response arrived. An official investigation had been opened. Dolores would be contacted, audited, scrutinized. And that, Evelyn whispered as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Beyond the buffer zone she'd just protected was the beginning of the end. She thought she could bully the neighborhood, Evelyn said, but she forgot one thing. What? She never asked what I do for a living, and just like that, everything began to crumble. And Dolores, she was just starting to feel the first cracks beneath her feet. How does it feel to be feared and then suddenly, completely ignored? Dolores was learning. The queen of our cul-de-sac, who once ruled with fines and threats, now found her declarations greeted with locked doors and lowered blinds. She would march down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, waiting for someone to flinch. No one did, not anymore. The moment Evelyn's ID hit the sunlight, the air in the neighborhood shifted. People didn't know every detail, but they knew enough to stop nodding when Dolores passed, enough to start asking questions. And Dolores? She sensed it. That was when she became dangerous. Because people like her, they don't know how to let go. They mistake silence for conspiracy. They feel power slipping through their fingers like sand, and their instincts scream to grip tighter. So she did. She ramped up everything. Daily patrols became hourly walks. Every lawn was photographed, every mailbox scrutinized. And every whisper of dissent, real or imagined, was treated as betrayal. The HOA fines tripled in number, aimed at random targets. Someone's trash bin lid wasn't fully shut, violation. A bike left in a driveway for more than 24 hours, violation. Holiday decorations taken down a day late, violation. It wasn't about order anymore. It was retaliation. But what Dolores didn't understand was that fear has an expiration date. Once broken, it doesn't return, and people, once awake, don't go back to sleep. Whispers turned to phone calls. Phone calls turned into late-night meetings, and suddenly, Evelyn's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "Thank you," one neighbor whispered over the line. "We've been afraid to speak for years. I have old emails," another said, "one she sent me, full of threats. She fined my son for parking too close to our own curb," someone else confessed. He was 15. Piece by piece, the mosaic of Dolores's reign began to show itself, not just to Evelyn but to everyone. And yet Evelyn never changed. She didn't gloat. She didn't post online. She didn't confront Dolores or parade her authority. She listened, documented, connected. The real battle, she always said, wasn't about proving Dolores wrong. It was about revealing how much damage she had done and how deeply her influence had burrowed into the bones of our community. And while Dolores stormed around in the open, Evelyn worked in the quiet. One morning as I poured coffee, I found her at the table with a red pen and a stack of papers, pages from the HOA's founding documents. Not the glossy pamphlets given to new homeowners, but the old, obscure filings lodged in the county records. "Dolores has been rewriting these bylaws for years," Evelyn said, circling a passage. "Small changes, tiny revisions. One word here, one phrase there. Is that legal? It's deceptive," she said. But what's more important is that she never followed the proper voting procedures to do it. She opened a manila folder, revealing a list of community signatures from past votes. "Look here. Same handwriting, same ink, 10 different names." She forged board approval. I leaned over the table, stunned. Why would she risk that? Evelyn's voice dropped. Because she knew what she was building wasn't just fragile, it was fraudulent. Then came the break. Not ours, Dolores's. It happened during a Saturday board meeting. Small turnout, just a few members. Dolores expected another rubber stamp session, another chance to reassert herself. But Mr. Henderson, the quiet board member, the one she always dismissed, stood up. And he didn't sit down. He brought a binder. Inside were emails, memos, screenshots of texts and HOA group messages, ones that showed Dolores bypassing protocols, manipulating votes, and using HOA funds to pay for her so-called beautification consultants. He didn't accuse. He read word for word. And Dolores, she snapped. She slammed her hands on the table, shouted that she was being targeted. She demanded silence, demanded unity, claimed she was the only thing keeping the neighborhood from descending into chaos. Her voice cracked with rage, but the board members didn't flinch. Not anymore. 2 days later, Dolores filed a formal complaint against Mr. Henderson. It backfired spectacularly. Turns out he had quietly contacted the city's HOA ethics board, submitted his own complaint with Evelyn's help, and it wasn't just about power abuse. It was about fraud. Evelyn's research, every signature, every bylaw change, every backdoor deal was now bundled into a single explosive packet sent to the city and soon to the state's housing division. What began as lawn drama had escalated into a full-on legal inquest. But Dolores wasn't done. She went lower. She started spreading rumors. Said Evelyn lied about her credentials, said she had fake government ties, whispered that she was dangerous, unstable, that Homeland Security was going to fire her any day. She posted on Facebook groups, sent anonymous emails to neighbors, left cryptic messages in people's mailboxes, warnings about interference. It was wild. Desperate. Sad. And nobody bought it because Evelyn had never needed to defend herself. Her work, quiet, thorough, and relentless, spoke for itself. I remember one night, she stood in our yard with her arms folded, looking out over the now famous buffer zone, the same space Dolores once tried to pave. "You know what the most dangerous kind of power is?" she asked. I shook my head. "The kind that's invisible. The kind no one challenges because they think it's normal." She paused. "Until someone reminds them what normal really is." She was right. Because something incredible started to happen. Our neighborhood, once controlled by fines and fear, began to bloom. A father and son, once too nervous to even walk their dog in the back trail, started biking through the buffer path together. An older woman painted a community pride sign and stuck it in her garden, something Dolores once banned. Someone organized a food drive. Another started a neighborhood cleanup weekend, and at the center of it all, never leading, just quietly supporting, was Evelyn. Then came the final crack in Dolores's armor, a letter from the Department of Environmental Protection, stamped, signed, official. It confirmed that Dolores's green optimization plan violated multiple state codes, and that a full investigation was underway. Her face when she opened that envelope? I'll never forget it. She stood in her driveway, hands trembling, eyes scanning the words over and over as if reading it again would make it disappear. She didn't speak to anyone for a week after that, but it wasn't over because Evelyn wasn't finished. One evening, She sat me down and unfolded a new document, something she'd been compiling for months. A dossier of sorts, evidence, timelines, conflicts of interest. I'm submitting it to the local council, she said, and to the Attorney General's office. For what? For potential criminal misconduct, she said simply, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't about HOA anymore. It was about corruption. And the reckoning that was coming would be bigger than fines and bylaws. It would be real. Legal. Permanent. Dolores could feel it too, because that week, she made her final mistake. She called the police. Again. This time, she accused Evelyn of intimidation, claimed she was stalking her. The officer who showed up? Same one from before. He didn't even take notes, just looked Dolores in the eye and said, "Ma'am, we suggest you speak to your attorney." And that's when Dolores cracked, not just her voice or her power, but her entire image. She screamed. In public. Called us federal rats, called the board traitors, accused neighbors of conspiracy. She shouted at Mrs. Gable in the grocery store, cursed at a teenager riding his bike too slowly, and the next morning, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. She didn't even try to hide it. Dolores was leaving. Not because she was done fighting, but because she had finally, painfully, realized that she'd already lost. What happens when a tyrant loses her grip, when the empire she built on control and fear begins to crumble beneath her? Well, some burn everything as they fall, others just disappear. What do you do when your enemy is no longer dangerous, just desperate? You watch. And that's exactly what Evelyn did. She didn't chase Dolores, she didn't retaliate. She didn't need to, because sometimes when people like Dolores realize the walls are closing in, they do the crumbling for you. It started slowly. The power slips first, then the persona, then the story they tell themselves about who they are. Dolores had always seen herself as the protector of the neighborhood, the gatekeeper of standards. She told herself it was about order, safety, beauty, but now she was the villain in whispers. The face of scandal in community forums, the name muttered with disgust by residents at morning coffee meetups. And as that illusion shattered, Dolores started to unravel in real time. The for sale sign on her lawn wasn't just a retreat, it was an admission, a white flag, but not one she waved gracefully. Oh no! She fought that reality tooth and nail, pretending it was her decision. Pretending she was downsizing. The truth, she was being forced out, and she knew it. You see, the city had begun its formal review, Evelyn's dossier cross-verified by zoning departments, the EPA, and the HOA Ethics Board had triggered something much bigger than our block. Investigators were now combing through every corner of Dolores's long, carefully guarded reign, every fine, every signature, every suspicious payment to her favored contractors. She was being dissected, not by Evelyn's hand but by her own paper trail. The rumors evolved quickly into confirmed facts. That she'd tried to rezone a federally protected buffer, that she'd forged board approvals, that she'd used HOA funds for personal gain, and the biggest blow of all? The state had ordered a full environmental restoration of the damaged green space. At Dolores's expense. You heard that right. The very land she wanted to convert into parking lots and pathways. Now, she was legally responsible for restoring it to its original ecological state, down to the native grass seed. That wasn't just a consequence. That was poetic justice. Dolores had poured years into that plan, every manipulation, every lie, every neighbor she'd silenced. And now the only thing she'd get out of it was a restoration bill the size of a luxury car. And still, she tried to salvage her story. She tried to host a farewell brunch for the neighborhood. No one came. She sent emails blaming everything on hostile federal interference. She handed out printed letters at the local park trying to rewrite the narrative. My vision was misunderstood. The new board is corrupt. Evelyn works for an overreaching government agency. But it was too late. Her words, once gospel to fearful residents, now sounded like static. Even her closest allies began to drift away, one by one. People who once voted in lockstep with her now stood silent when she passed. Some returned her gaze with quiet contempt, others just turned away. I'll never forget the day Mr. Henderson knocked on our door. He held a manila envelope. His hands were shaking. I think this belongs with your wife, he said. It's evidence from years ago. It was a trove of old memos, board minutes that had been lost, and correspondence between Dolores and a private development firm that had once offered her a sizable commission for clearing access to unused HOA land. She had planned it all. From the very beginning. It wasn't about beautifying the neighborhood. It was always about the money. That night, Evelyn said something I'll never forget. She underestimated one thing. What's that? I asked. She looked out the window toward Dolores's house. Accountability. She didn't think it applied to her. And that's when everything snapped into place. The next morning, two unmarked sedans pulled into our neighborhood. Not dramatic, not with flashing lights, Just slow, purposeful steps from government investigators carrying briefcases and quiet authority. They went straight to Dolores's house. She didn't answer the door at first. But when she finally opened it, face pale and eyes wide, they calmly handed her a document, a notice of formal investigation, state-level charges. The buffer zone she tried to erase? It had become the very trap she built for herself, and still, she didn't leave. She tried to fight. She hired a new lawyer, sleazy, loud, confident. He showed up at the next emergency board meeting demanding to see Evelyn's credentials, threatening lawsuits, and declaring Dolores the victim of an illegal smear campaign. It was almost laughable. Until Evelyn calmly stood up, she didn't raise her voice, didn't brandish her badge, didn't even reference the federal backing behind her actions. She just asked one question. Did Dolores file the required environmental waiver before submitting her optimization proposal? Silence. Then she held up a document that states, official records. The waiver was blank. Never filed, never even requested. You could hear a pin drop. The lawyer sat down without another word. Dolores didn't even look up. By then, the pressure was unbearable. Her reputation gone, her authority stripped. The fines from the EPA were mounting, and the civil lawsuits starting to trickle in. Individual homeowners were filing claims for harassment, defamation, and fraudulent fines. Dolores was drowning. And Evelyn? She never pushed. She didn't need to. Because Dolores had spent 15 years building her throne on sand, and all Evelyn had done was let the tide come in. But the final act, it wasn't legal. It wasn't about fines. It was about shame. It came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I saw Dolores's garage door rise slowly, the way it does when it's not just opening, but closing a chapter. A small moving truck pulled into the driveway. No helpers. No neighbors waving goodbye. Just Dolores and a few taped up boxes. She didn't slam doors. She didn't scream. She didn't even glance around. She packed in silence. One fragile lamp, a mirror, a suitcase. The remnants of someone who once ruled a neighborhood, now reduced to echoes. And then, just before noon, she stepped into the driver's seat. She didn't honk, didn't make a scene, but she did look up one last time. Her eyes found Evelyn standing just inside our doorway. They locked. And in that moment, there was no rage, no arrogance, just regret, and something Evelyn would later describe as pleading. But she didn't wave, didn't apologize, didn't blink. She just turned away and drove off. No farewell, no monument. Just the soft rumble of tires rolling down a street she no longer ruled. The house sat empty for weeks. The sign out front read price reduced in bold red font. Buyers passed it up, realtors whispered. People didn't want the house of the woman who tried to turn green space into gold, who turned community trust into a wrecking ball. And the final twist. The state issued a permanent injunction against any development in the buffer zone. They even installed a small, official plaque near the trailhead that read, protected land, restored by community effort. No mention of Dolores, but everyone knew what it meant. And Evelyn, she never bragged, never demanded recognition, but the neighbors did it for her. They brought flowers, cookies, thank you cards, stories of how they'd once feared speaking up, stories of how she'd inspired them to take their homes and their voices back. Someone left a small sign in our yard one morning. Hand-painted, crooked, but beautiful. This lawn helped save the neighborhood. We never took it down. Because sometimes the loudest victory is the one you don't have to speak. It echoes through silence, through resilience. Through the sound of a moving truck driving away from a kingdom built on lies, and through the laughter of a community finally learning how to breathe free again. What happens next? That's the beautiful part, because the worst is behind us, but the best, it's just beginning. Why didn't she just leave? That was the question neighbors kept asking in the weeks after the moving truck vanished down our quiet street. Dolores was gone. Her reign was over. The power she once held, stripped, crushed under the weight of her own ambition. But evil doesn't always walk out the front door when you ask it to. Sometimes it lingers. Hiding. Waiting. And in Dolores's case, it had left fingerprints all over the neighborhood. Her house sat empty for almost a month. Grass overgrown, windows dark, her name still on the deed, but her presence vanished. Or so we thought. It was a Thursday morning when Evelyn first noticed. It's a single white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just placed carefully at the foot of our door. Inside, a printed flyer, HOA board corruption. The real story. The headline screamed in bold caps, and below it, a wall of rambling accusations. Anonymous. Cowardly. But we recognized the language, the syntax, the misplaced capitalizations. It was Dolores, still trying to spin the narrative, even in exile. Evelyn folded the flyer once, twice, then slid it into her file folder without a word. She's not done, she said. I could see it in her eyes. That edge returning, not fear, alertness. The same calm precision she used when piecing together her original investigation. Dolores had left the house, yes. But her influence had burrowed deep, and some people still carried her water. It started with flyers. Then came the emails. Mass messages sent through old HOA mailing lists, conspiracies, allegations. Claims that Evelyn was abusing federal power. That Mr. Henderson had falsified records. That the buffer zone restoration was a waste of taxpayer money. Orchestrated by radical environmentalists. The tone, unhinged, but the intent, clear. Discredit the very people who had held her accountable. I think she's trying to trigger a reverse narrative, Evelyn said one night, her laptop glowing across her face. If she can't erase what happened, she'll try to drown it out with chaos. And that's when things escalated. Someone spray-painted communist across Mr. Henderson's garage. The community notice board, vandalized with crude flyers accusing the new HOA of financial fraud, and worse. Anonymous complaints were filed against 3 newly elected board members with their employers. False ones. Evelyn knew this wasn't just bitterness anymore. It was scorched earth. A former tyrant with nothing left to lose, trying to take down everything in her wake. The neighborhood began to fracture again. Not fully, not like before, but you could feel it. The tension at block parties. The hesitation at mailbox chats. People began to question, what if some of this was true? What if Dolores, despite everything, had a point? That's the thing about doubt. It doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to be whispered. And Evelyn, she knew silence wouldn't work this time. So she made a move, not loud, not reactive. Strategic. She quietly gathered all the harassment materials. The flyers, the emails, the graffiti photos, and filed a formal complaint. Not with the city. With the state cybercrime unit. Because Dolores had made one critical mistake. The flyers were printed at a commercial shop. And they'd been paid for with a traceable credit card. 2 weeks later, the unit confirmed the source. Dolores. She was still living nearby, not in our neighborhood, but in a small rental 3 towns over. Still mailing things, still logging into old HOA portals. Still using her last remnants of access to stir discontent. The investigators didn't press charges. Not yet, but they issued a formal cease and desist, a warning, one that Evelyn helped draft. The letter was short, simple, and devastating. Further contact with this community will constitute harassment under state law. Continued defamation of protected public officials, including federal employees, may lead to prosecution. It was delivered by certified courier. We never got another flyer. But Dolores wasn't the only rot left behind. You see, people like her don't operate alone. They build networks, tiny alliances of resentment and ambition. And one of them still sat on the board. Karen Bennett, a woman in her early 50s with a stiff smile and a glassy stare. She had once been Dolores's right hand, the one who nodded at meetings, enforced quiet fines, whispered in hallways, and while she'd voted with the board to remove Dolores, she'd never spoken publicly against her. Now, she began showing up again, more vocal, more assertive, demanding financial audits of the buffer restoration, questioning Evelyn's presence at meetings, asking for records that had long since been reviewed. Evelyn didn't confront her, she documented her because Karen wasn't subtle. She'd started holding unofficial meetings in her backyard, inviting old guard neighbors for coffee and community healing discussions. She wasn't using Dolores's name, but the message was clear. The board went too far. One evening, Evelyn got an email from a burner address. Resign now, you've done enough damage. No signature. No threats, just a quiet implication. The next morning, Mr. Henderson found his car's windshield smashed. Police were called, statements filed. But there were no witnesses, just a stone wrapped in newspaper, with one word scrawled across it in black marker, traitor. I remember looking at Evelyn that night, our kitchen dim, the world suddenly heavy again. I asked her, do you regret getting involved? She didn't answer right away. Then she said something I'll never forget. You don't stop a fire by yelling at it. You stop it by removing the fuel and exposing the one still holding the matches. She meant Karen because it was clear now, Dolores may have fallen, but her echo still lived in Karen's silence and in her schemes, and Evelyn was done waiting. She requested a formal special session of the HOA, not to argue. To reveal, she came with binders, printed transcripts of Karen's hidden meeting invitations, screenshots of burner email accounts traced back to her Wi-Fi network, financial activity showing Karen had consulted with the same landscape firm Dolores once hired, and the most damning piece? An email, never meant to be seen, from Karen to Dolores. I'll keep the pressure on. You just stay quiet. It was over. Karen resigned that night. No apology, no speech. Just a stiff smile that cracked as she left the room, her exit quiet and permanent. And for the first time, true silence settled over the neighborhood. The kind that comes after a storm. Not fearful. Peaceful. Earned. Because what Evelyn had done wasn't just remove a tyrant, she'd exposed every root of rot Dolores had planted, uprooted them, burned them, and reminded every neighbor that silence is complicity, but truth is power. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It just stands steady and undeniable, like a lawn that grows wild and honest at the edge of a protected buffer zone, waiting for the next storm. And ready. Do you know what peace sounds like? Not silence, not stillness. It's the soft clink of shovels at sunrise, the rustle of grass swaying in protected wind, the laughter of neighbors planting together. Where suspicion once grew, peace sounds like community, and that's what was finally returning to ours. After months of tension, of hidden agendas, late-night flyers, and court filings, there was no villain left on the board. Dolores was gone. Karen was exposed, and the last roots of their schemes had been ripped out like weeds. But something unexpected happened after they fell. The neighborhood didn't celebrate. Not really. There were no parties, no speeches, just this quiet, almost hesitant calm. Like a town after a long drought, still waiting to believe the rain would last. Because Dolores hadn't just abused power, she'd redefined it. For years, she'd trained us to obey, to accept, to second-guess ourselves. Every faded mailbox, every blade of grass, every curtain left open too late. It all carried judgment. It would take time to unlearn that. And Evelyn understood that better than anyone. She didn't gloat, she didn't take a position on the new board. Despite being asked, she didn't even attend every meeting. Her job, as she saw it, was finished. Now it was about rebuilding, letting the community breathe on its own, and oddly enough, that's when we began to hear the real stories. One afternoon, I bumped into Mr. Henderson outside the restored trail entrance. His shoulders looked lighter, like a weight had finally slipped off after months of carrying it. She used to threaten my wife, he said quietly, back when we first moved in. Told her the HOA could take our house if she hung laundry outside. He looked at the trees, the new saplings planted along the buffer edge. I didn't say anything for years. I just paid the fines. I didn't want to rock the boat. That phrase, didn't want to rock the boat, kept coming up. From a young mom down the block who said Dolores fined her for letting her toddler ride a tricycle on the sidewalk. From a veteran who'd stopped coming to board meetings because Dolores made every decision before we even sat down. From a retired couple who admitted they only voted for Dolores out of fear she'd retaliate if they didn't. That's the legacy she left behind. Not just fines, but fear. And Evelyn, she understood that too. She started a quiet project. No press, no fanfare. Just a spreadsheet she called Community Recovery. She met with residents one by one, heard their stories, helped them draft formal requests to review past fines. In many cases, the new board refunded money, thousands of dollars that had been wrongfully taken. But that wasn't the real healing. The real healing came from being heard. Evelyn didn't act like a federal agent. She acted like a neighbor. A quiet force had walked through the fire and come out stronger, not harder. Mrs. Gable said it best during a small evening gathering at her porch. You didn't just stand up to Dolores, she said, holding Evelyn's hand. You reminded the rest of us that we're allowed to stand, too. And as the weeks passed, the neighborhood began to change, slowly, naturally, beautifully. The path through the buffer zone was reopened, this time as a protected nature walk. The local artist painted a mural on the old HOA clubhouse wall, not of Evelyn, not of Dolores, but of trees growing wild beside a small, untrimmed lawn. Beneath it were the words, "This land belongs to everyone." And on the corner of the street, someone, no one ever admitted who, installed a tiny wooden signpost with a carved quote, "Power built on fear never lasts, truth does, but peace, as Evelyn always said, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of accountability. And that final layer was still coming. Because while Dolores had vanished from the neighborhood, the legal consequences of her actions were still rippling outward. The Department of Urban Planning had completed its investigation. The EPA's fines were locked in. But the last blow, the one no one saw coming, arrived in a quiet envelope from the State Attorney General's office. Evelyn received it on a Wednesday morning. She opened it at the kitchen table, scanned the contents, then let out a breath she'd been holding for months. "Daniel," she said, "they're filing formal charges, criminal ones, forgery, environmental fraud, misuse of funds, and possibly obstruction of justice. It wouldn't be a dramatic arrest. There'd be no news vans or courtroom showdowns, but there would be accountability. And not just for Dolores." Investigators had uncovered several local officials who'd quietly backed her proposal in exchange for potential kickbacks, building inspectors, zoning staff, even a former councilman who had pushed her original development application through faster than protocol allowed. It was a network. And Evelyn had helped dismantle it, piece by quiet piece. But she didn't celebrate, she didn't even tell most of the neighborhood because that's not why she did it. I asked her one night, as we sat on the porch watching the dusk settle over the trees, why didn't you walk away after Dolores left? She thought for a long moment, then said, because justice isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a better one. I let those words sit in the air. Soft, true. And as we watched the new HOA board welcome residents for an open discussion, no agendas, no scripts, I finally understood. The real victory wasn't in taking someone down. It was in helping others rise. A week later, we received an official letter from the city. It wasn't addressed to Evelyn directly, but to the residents at our address. Inside was a formal resolution, passed unanimously by the city council. The ecological buffer zone behind our property was now permanently protected. It would be listed on state registries, shielded from future rezoning, preserved for public use as nature intended. The document had Evelyn's name in the footnotes, not as a complainant, but as a contributor, someone who had helped identify and prevent illegal development that would have permanently damaged a protected area. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a headline. It was something better, a legacy. That night, Evelyn taped the letter inside the hallway closet. Out of sight, private. Not to boast. Just to remember, because some victories aren't meant to be worn, they're meant to be lived, and our lives, they were full again, not just of peace, but of presence. We had neighbors knocking on our door again, not with complaints, but with invitations to dinners, to volunteer days, to laughter. The buffer zone was alive, the community was awake, and Evelyn, she was at ease, not because everything was perfect, but because she knew that if anything ever threatened it again, the neighborhood would no longer be afraid. They'd stand together. And this time, they wouldn't wait for someone else to fight. Why did Evelyn stop smiling when she saw that envelope? It was barely thicker than usual. Cream-colored, government-sealed, just another document. We assumed maybe a final ruling. An update on the buffer zone case, a summary of the restoration. Approval, but Evelyn's eyes didn't move past the return address. She froze, then slowly sat down at the dining table, that envelope trembling slightly in her hands like it carried something heavier than paper. Daniel, she whispered. It's from her old neighborhood. Whose? She didn't answer. Instead, she slid a thin letter from inside. No official stamps, no case number, just a handwritten note, carefully folded. The handwriting was precise, cold, controlled, and the first word, agent. Evelyn read it aloud, slowly, quietly, like the words might combust if spoken too fast. You don't know me, but I lived in Summer Grove 3 years before Dolores arrived in your neighborhood. What happened to you happened to us too, but worse, we tried to stop her. She made sure we couldn't. Evelyn's hand gripped the edge of the table. There was a man. His name was Victor Landry. He opposed her, challenged her rezoning attempt. Then, one day, his house mysteriously failed code inspection. Days later, it caught fire. I felt my chest tighten. Evelyn kept reading. They called it faulty wiring. But his friends told a different story. Dolores had confronted him loudly, publicly. The night before, there were rumors, evidence that vanished, witnesses who were never contacted. She paused, stared at the letter, her eyes narrowed. No one could prove anything, but he left town after that, broken, afraid, and Dolores, she moved on. Just like that, set her sights on a new neighborhood, yours. At the bottom of the letter was a name. Marie Givens, and beneath it, former board secretary. Summer Grove HOA. There was a phone number, a brief apology, and one last sentence that chilled me. If she's still near you, be careful. She doesn't stop when she loses, she disappears, then reinvents herself, and starts again. Evelyn didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she stood up. Opened her laptop, and typed 2 words into a federal law enforcement database, Dolores Myers. The screen blinked. No results. Then she tried something else, Dolores Making. And the floodgates opened for aliases, 3 former addresses, 2 unresolved zoning investigations, and 1 sealed case file with a label that made my stomach twist. Fraud, public corruption referred, inactive. Evelyn stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. She's done this before, she whispered. Not just Summer Grove, at least 2 other neighborhoods, same pattern, same fines, same fake compliance letters. She leaves when the pressure gets too high. And then she said something that made the air in the room go cold. She doesn't lose, she retreats. That night, Evelyn contacted her federal liaison, discreetly explained the pattern. The sealed records, the whistleblower letter. She didn't push for reopening the case. She didn't need to. All she asked for was surveillance, because Evelyn didn't believe Dolores was finished, and she was right. 3 days later, Evelyn received a ping, a location match. Dolores Myers had filed a business permit in another city. Same signature, same developer. Contact listed as consultant, different town. different HOA. New victims. It felt surreal. Like watching a horror film reset, but this wasn't fiction. It was real. And Evelyn had just uncovered the prelude. She printed the permit, highlighted the relevant names, compiled the old complaints from Summergrove and ours. Then she picked up the phone. Not to report Dolores. To warn the next town. She spoke to a junior clerk at the new HOA, a young woman named Nira who had no idea who Dolores really was. Evelyn didn't accuse, didn't dramatize. She simply laid out the facts. Then she sent the file. A few days passed. Then Nira called back. She was shaken. She's already proposed a landscape revitalization plan, she said, voice cracking. She's targeting 3 properties next to a wooded zone, says the trees are a hazard. Evelyn leaned forward. She's setting up a rezoning play. Yes, and the board is listening. They were, Nira said, not anymore. Because the moment they read Evelyn's file, the full record, the previous charges, the EPA fines, everything changed. Dolores's proposal was pulled. Her consultant dropped her. And when the local paper picked up the connection to a previous HOA scandal, she didn't even show up to defend herself. She vanished. Again. No forwarding address. No response. Just like Summergrove, just like here. Gone. But not in the way she expected this time. Her name carried weight. Not authority. Warning. It echoed in planning boards, in small-town forums, in HOA meetings where new presidents whispered, "Isn't she the one from that case with the federal agent?" Dolores wasn't feared anymore. She was recognized. That's what Evelyn wanted, not vengeance. Not applause. Just truth. Recorded, preserved. A warning for the next neighborhood before it was too late. I remember asking her one night as we walked past the buffer zone, now in full bloom with native flowers and the soft rustle of restored underbrush. What happens if she comes back? Evelyn didn't even pause. She won't. How do you know? Because her name used to be a weapon. She said, now it's a file in every zoning department's system. She can't hide in plain sight anymore. We walked in silence after that. Not heavy silence, calm. Because the final piece had clicked into place. Dolores hadn't just been defeated. She'd been documented. And the woman who once controlled an entire community with paperwork and fear would now be undone by the very thing she used to build her empire. Paper. But this time, it told the truth. And Evelyn, she made sure of that. What does justice feel like? Not like a courtroom gavel, not like a loud, triumphant shout. It feels like breath, the kind you take for the first time in months, full, unshaken, quiet. That's what the neighborhood felt like now. Because after everything, after the fines, the investigations, the threats, the lies, Dolores was gone, not just physically, but systemically. Her schemes undone, her network exposed, her name, once wielded like a hammer, now just a cautionary tale in meeting rooms across the state. But more than that, we were healing. You could feel it in the way neighbors spoke to one another, not in whispers, but in full voice. You could see it in the color returning to front yards, in porches once kept quiet at dusk now glowing with string lights and soft laughter. It was subtle at first. Then it bloomed. The HOA, newly reformed, passed transparency protocols, open voting, term limits, independent audits. And for the first time in years, people actually showed up to meetings, not out of fear, but participation. They didn't come to fight, they came to belong. I remember one Saturday, weeks after Karen's resignation and Dolores's final vanishing act, when I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. A group of kids playing in the restored buffer zone. Tag, hide and seek. One of them tripped over a log and burst into laughter, real, wild, untethered joy. Right there, where Dolores once saw only concrete, that's what Evelyn had saved, not a patch of trees, not a line on a zoning map, but the right for a child to fall into the grass and laugh without fear of a letter on the doorstep. And the neighborhood never forgot it, even if Evelyn tried to stay out of the spotlight. The appreciation found her anyway. A neighbor brought over a ceramic plaque to Evelyn, the quiet storm who saved the roots. Someone else painted a watercolor of the trail and left it on our porch, no note, just initials. And one evening, as the board welcomed a new resident family at the monthly gathering, Mr. Henderson stood up, quietly, respectfully. He said, "Before we end tonight, I want to acknowledge the person who reminded us that communities don't protect themselves. People do." Then he raised a glass toward Evelyn. She didn't stand, didn't wave. She just smiled. Softly. The kind of smile you only earn through patience, through pain, through purpose. But the greatest recognition of all came in the mail, a letter from the city. This time not about permits or enforcement. It was an invitation. To speak at the annual Civic Integrity Conference. They wanted Evelyn to share her story. How a federal agent, acting not in her official capacity but as a citizen, uncovered a pattern of abuse hiding in plain sight. She hesitated at first. "Daniel," she said, "I'm not interested in becoming some figurehead. I smiled. You're not, you're a witness, and witnesses matter, she accepted, and weeks later, I sat in the audience at a small auditorium as Evelyn took the podium. No slides. No fanfare. Just her voice. Measured, clear. She spoke about bylaw, loopholes, about HOA weaponization, about how authority can mask exploitation and how most victims don't even realize they're being manipulated until it's too late. But then she paused, looked at the crowd, and said something I'll never forget. The most dangerous kind of corruption doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to stay quiet, that resistance will cost you, that the peace isn't worth the price of confrontation. But peace built on fear isn't peace. It's surrender, and I didn't move into my neighborhood to surrender. The room was silent. Then applause. Not wild, not chaotic, earnest. And I saw something shift in Evelyn that day. Not pride, not relief. Permission. To finally rest. She never became an activist, never started a podcast or wrote a book. She went back to her work, her long hours, her quiet reading. But the neighborhood knew, and they watched over her now the way she once did for them. That's the thing about real leadership. It doesn't crown itself. It steps in and then steps back. Evelyn never bragged, but her story spread anyway. I overheard someone at the grocery store telling another neighbor, "You live on that street? The one where the Homeland Security lady took down the HOA tyrant?" And the response, "Yeah. We call it Evelyn's Trail now, and that buffer zone, it bloomed. The native grasses took root again. Wildflowers returned, birds nested in the thickets. And in the center, along the trailhead, the city installed a modest wooden sign, protected greenbelt, preserved by citizen action. And underneath, carved into a bronze plate, in recognition of the residents who stood up when silence would have been easier. 2025. It didn't bear her name, but everyone knew, sometimes the legacy isn't carved in stone. It's carried in memory. In the way children grow up without fearing patrols or pointless fines. In the way new board members speak softly but transparently. In the way laughter returns to backyards once ruled by silence. We still live here. The lawn is a little longer than regulation recommends. No one complains. The birds still land on the fence posts. The air still carries the scent of pine and summer earth. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear Evelyn's words echo through the leaves. The strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they just hold the line until the truth arrives. Dolores's house was eventually sold. Quietly. The buyer? A young teacher with 2 kids. She planted tomatoes in the backyard, built a tiny library out front, and never once received a fine. The community is different now, not perfect, but better, wiser. Because one woman decided to stand where no one else would. And in doing so, she didn't just stop a corrupt HOA president. She gave a neighborhood its voice back, its roots, its peace. And that, dear viewer, is what happens when the wrong person gets pushed too far and the right one decides they've had enough. If you made it to the end of this wild ride, thank you. And wherever you're watching from, remember, sometimes the lawn isn't the problem. Sometimes it's the person holding the clipboard. This has been HOA Headache Stories. Stay sharp and stay free.